Welcome back, heroes. Yes, I have returned. It has been not the mightiest of giants, nor the fiercest of dragons that have kept me down. As a game master, I have certain powers over the forces of my world. I can command armies. I can sink continents. I can slay the mightiest and lay low the least. But I am but a game master. And outside of my game, I can fall victim to the smallest of adversaries, the tiniest that dwell within all of us, that none of us are immune from. And it is that adversary that I thought would be fitting to wrestle with tonight. So, prepare yourselves. Your dagger will not avail you here. Your swords, your shields, your spells, useless. Tonight, we battle something else here at the Lair of OmnusI. And I pray you fare better than I this night.
Hello, I'm OmnusI, your game master this evening here in my lair.
Greetings, my friends. Once more, I am OmnusI, master of the Lair of OmnusI. It has been far too long. Unfortunately, some things are beyond our control. And that, tonight, will be the subject of this particular lair. Episode 20. We're going to discuss one of the inevitables of life and how it affects one's role-playing games. So, without further prelude or discourse, let us begin the subject of diseases in role-playing games. The role of disease in a game may fall under one of four categories primarily. It may be inconsequential or completely absent. It may be a minor nuisance. It could be a major threat, or it could be the crux of your entire adventure. For instance, if you're playing in a game where all the characters are vampires, say, with their undead resistances and immunities, or if you're playing in the very far future where pan-immunity may be an opportunity for your characters to indulge in never having to worry about diseases again, disease may not be a factor. Oh, for that. But if you are running a game of high adventure, perhaps you don't want your players to be saddled with the fear of disease. Perhaps the omnipresent threat of death by violence or other daring do may make the meanness and seeming randomness to many people to just be an unfortunate thing that can be lampshaded, or one can just hand wave it away. Certainly, with all the other things that are going on in adventure, disease may not be something that needs to be mentioned at all. If it is a minor nuisance, that means that on occasion your characters may very well get ill. After all, adventurers travel to areas that certainly wouldn't be quarantined as safe, and oftentimes filthy and full of the potential for encountering diseases. Even if you don't make lethal diseases, certainly they can find their attention sapped, their focus wavering, or the inability to clearly communicate may be a factor of such a disease. Many of these diseases just require your party to either take some precautions, or it could be a lesser danger early on in their careers that are eventually passed on by more significant dangers. Certainly many games have an ability to completely triumph over diseases at certain stages. Dungeons & Dragons' ability to cure diseases, for instance, is a solid example. If, however, there's a low magic setting that doesn't have such curatives, or there's a significant disease that may resist such treatments, then disease may be a major factor in your world. And think of it from a historical perspective, if you will, for a moment. Your average peasant in feudal to medieval Europe, just as a catch-all, and certainly that's a condition that was applied in the feudal eras all over the world, or clannish structures. Anytime before the Renaissance, before people started to understand more about disease and possibly treating it, disease was one of the most feared things your common person feared, and many of the nobles as well. In fact, things such as war weren't as much of a concern. For the nobles, they were prepared to deal with war. That was what they were trained for. For the commoners, many of them didn't own very much, or certainly nothing worth attaching one's life to. As war came, they fled it, usually giving enough warning that they could get out of the way before they were slaughtered. And a quick, clean death from war certainly looked like a better alternative to the commoner than the idea of lingering in complete agony from the invisible hand that strikes you down. Many, of course, attached religious significance to disease, assuming that it was a curse levied upon one in payment for one's sins in the mortal world. And as such, disease was a frightening nemesis to the every man. And of course, disease was not just a minor annoyance. Of course, they had, I'm sure, their versions of the cold or the flu that you might get to this day. But smallpox, malaria in certain parts of the world, the plague, the bubonic plague, and a host of other maladies that swept through and killed hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions, certainly were one of the things that almost everybody feared. And that's one aspect that you could certainly focus on in a role-playing game. The idea that these diseases are poorly understood, they are something that afflicts many people at once, and figuring out how your world adapts to these things. Now, if you just choose to hand wave away disease, then the rest of this conversation probably isn't going to mean much to you. It's perhaps not fun to have a character laid low by a disease, and in fact, if your game does go to heroic elevated levels of either magic or technology, disease may never be a factor for your game. Fine. There's plenty of other things to involve your characters with. However, even relatively minor diseases can be things for your characters to struggle through. It's a challenge, sort of in the same way that a trivial encounter may be a challenge. Sometimes it may require your characters to take a break and rest. And as a game master of no small amount of experience, sometimes the players may want to just continue to plow through and vault through in very short amounts of time, accumulate as much experience and shoot up at power as they can. Sometimes disease is just a way of your character saying you've got to take a break and spend a little time taking care of other things. And of course, as inconvenient as they are, most adventurers don't enjoy going on without being at full strength. Either they will look for cures, And, of course, if you make magical cures available, this may be an impetus to set your group onto a quest, or to at least spend some of their resources on herbs and poultices and other methods of attempting to combat this disease. You can make an entire niche for a specialist who treats these kind of things, ailments. You have plague doctors, herbalists, hedge wizards, wise women, witches, who may be able to treat the maladies and ailments of your player characters, enriching your world, giving you more people with more roles to play that your characters can interact with. Certainly, if you have a more elevated society, not as much a feudal and a little bit more primitive is a harsh word, but without the social structures that we start to assume in the guild era and beyond, you would have, perhaps in larger cities, you might have centers of learning where maladies are treated. Those could be as much centers of disease as things like pasteurization and things are not understood. Or perhaps you have magic that is able to treat different diseases or drive off certain things. Maybe you have a city that has more sanitation, that flushes the filth and detritus out away from the city, leaving the people in a little bit cleaner situations that may help cut down disease. Maybe you focus on creatures that are brought in by the humans that help get rid of the vermin that might spread the disease. All things that are elements of your game that you can think about to flesh out and help develop your game world. Because, quite honestly, some of the greatest events that took place in our very own world in history are some of the plagues that decimated humanity. Completely restructuring kingdoms, requiring entirely new ways of producing, getting labor, forcing us to advance and evolve and develop and invent. Disease left an indelible mark upon humanity. In your world, it might be something to think about how diseases and plagues may have shaped your world. Certainly there are post-apocalyptic games that involved a plague or perhaps were magnified by plague. Shadowrun's world, even though you don't think about it much, there was a vast plague that killed millions of people. That changed the landscape of their world. The grain blight of Autoduel caused millions to die from starvation and rioting. So disease is something that if you don't deal with, you might at least want to think about leaving some scars of the passage of disease into your world to frame proper amounts of tragedy with leaps of growth in your society, or at least some sort of altered change. Another reason why some towns may be walled is to prevent people who might bring disease into your society. So all elements that are useful to think about, if nothing else. Now, the last level of disease that one might think about is, of course, when the disease is the pinnacle of the adventure, the whole point of it. One of the most common ones these days is the outbreak of some plague that alters or changes people and brings forth some sort of zombie apocalypse setting in one level or another. It doesn't have to be something that threatens the entire globe, although those are popular. But those kind of ailments usually take a couple of forms as far as the adventures that they engender. You have ones where your characters are rushing to find a cure for the plague in the hopes of saving their civilization, their loved ones, their peoples. Sometimes it can just be fighting off the zombies and trying to cut out the symptoms without having a realistic chance of fighting at the root cause. And there are many iterations of these kind of stories. Sometimes a good story is that there just isn't a cure, that no cure is feasible, and it becomes a study in character on how your characters are going to survive in this horrible situation. I posit something like The Walking Dead as being gripping drama involving a very harsh scenario that the zombies really are just a backdrop of, but they're an ever-present backdrop that you can't forget about. So Another thing that's also interesting with the concept of disease is that how there are so many variants, especially when you take into account alien diseases or magical diseases, and think about how those prisms, those filters, can change what exactly the horribleness or the discomfort of diseases can bring. If you have alien diseases, perhaps a parasite or some such, it can act completely different from a disease as we know it. Rather than being something that breaks down our bodies or changes something, it may make a change in a completely drastic way. I remember playing a game in a con where the characters were some of the last characters who were not afflicted by this disease, but the problem was it didn't do anything to the humans except change their bodies so that they produced and inhaled more of a methane-based atmosphere. It was using the humans to change the very atmosphere to suit the aliens, and the party had to deal in a very toxic environment that, as the world was beginning to grossly change with the billions of people on Earth that were all being affected, and find out how to defeat it and get around it, and then how to save the world afterward from the changes that had already been made. It was an interesting game. It was definitely engaging, but it was a relatively short one. There was only so much drama that it really could handle. It also was, everybody who was affected, their skin turned orange, so it became fairly obvious who the people who were passing on the plague were. As I said, it was good for 3 sessions, and it was engaging enough. But again, breaking what exactly the disease is to make it fit the threat that you're looking to bring for your story. As far as how you settle with diseases, in the lower levels, having your players have the possibility of concocting these diseases, perhaps using disease as a weapon. I've certainly seen that as one aspect of playing characters in a kind of a somewhat shameful behavior of one of our groups who got access to the cause disease because the character was a reverencer of a deity of disease. They used the spell cause disease to afflict noble people and persons of interest with embarrassing social diseases. Nothing like a case of syphilis to an alderman, requiring him to make an interesting explanation to his wife how he contracted this. Well, a little blackmail here and there ended up being very effective, as long as that particular chicanery flew under the radar. So it can be a tool as well as a threat. Now, another thing that can be interesting is if your game world involves competing powers, deities in a fantasy setting, for instance. If there is a deity of health, it is often attractive to have a deity of disease or death or some such. In that case, in your world, if you have these deities directly impacting, perhaps through their followers or maybe by sending avatars and what have you, something to think about as an adventure opportunity is for all of those good clerics who are going around, or priests or holy men or healers or what have you, treating these ailments. One must think that these perhaps less powerful or rarer deities of disease would do all they could to sabotage those efforts of alleviating the pain and discomfort of disease so as to magnify the effects of their gods. Therefore, you could have a very nice little conflict going between the gods of healing and the gods of disease that could get very nasty as the plague spreaders attempt to one-up their counterparts, certainly doing whatever they can to minimize their effect on helping their flocks. So, this is just touching on the diseases. We're not going to cover specifics and everything, but there are many games where perhaps if there is some sort of a disease, it's just delegated to a few dice rolls every once in a while. I myself have found very few places in prepared adventures or source books that really cover what kind of diseases you might find in a given area, what they'd be called, how messy they are, and so on and so forth. It's something that's been relatively neglected in later editions of games or games as they've been coming out. So I would urge you, since I know how annoying diseases can be and how harmful they can be recently, to consider them in your own games as both something that the player should be concerned with or something that they spend all of their effort in fighting. So that's what I've learned about disease, and hopefully it'll help you as well to make a richer, more involving game. So now that we've talked about that and the unpleasantness of disease, let's go over the rewards of combating it, shall we? One of the most common ways of dealing with disease is to take some sort of medicine or treatment. These days, that often comes from someone who has been trained in different medicines and knows what kind of chemicals or other sorts of treatments will help in one's maladies. That may be a pill, perhaps, or some sort of medicine. Some people, when they're suffering from something like a sore and raspy throat, they will do some sort of self-medication. Always game master responsibly. So, if your game has magic or some other aspect of dealing with disease and you incorporate disease into your game, one thing that you can do to kind of help your players over the hump with the imagination is to have props ready. And the good news is, for potions, it's relatively easy to do. For instance, thrift shops, rummage sales, and knick-knack shops can oftentimes offer a variety of clever little bottles, varying sizes and colors, and not very expensive. They can be collected relatively easily and doctored up to look old, or as if they've been in a dungeon for a while. Keeping them clean and filling them with some sort of liquid can help to enhance the illusion that you are giving somebody a potion bottle. Also, I've found a nice little rack. It was a spice rack with small little glass bottles and a screw on top, which kind of fit more the size of what a lot of people assume potions would be like. If you had to drink the contents of a bottle of this size in the middle of a battle with swords swinging and whatnot, that would seem rather implausible. If, say, you had something smaller like this that you could just dash, might be a little bit easier for people to consider a magical potion to be of a smaller size. However, using something like this can allow you to give your players something that they can think about when they consider a rather particularly impressive or impactful potion. Depending on how rare they are, that could be your garden variety one. I wouldn't say for in my game give my player a prop for healing potions, because my players go through those like candy as it is, such as the game that I run, and most of my healing potions are herbal based rather than magical, so it's just another piece of equipment for them. But if they get to, say, an elixir of longevity, then by all means, having something to celebrate that can certainly help. I would not generally recommend filling it with any kind of a liquid that would, say, have any kind of negative effect on a person. Kool-Aid or something might not be bad. Anything with high fructose corn syrup, like sodas and things like that, stay away from. But, Kool-Aid in a bottle. If you're playing with adults, I would recommend against the adult beverages, but to each their own. You have your own style, after all. And I'd be a hypocrite to say that I have never indulged in the use of adult beverages to alleviate a symptom that I've been suffering through lately. So, got to get through a game somehow. Another thing that I have found, and along with the you've waited a long time. We'll say 25 Lair points for tonight. Along with that, I got this at a big gaming convention a long time ago, back when they had them up in the Milwaukee area. But I got this from Klein's Bottling Company. Had these specialty bottles. They're very nice. It says Gamer's Grog, an invigorating blend of +5 to +12 ingredients. Adds strength, longevity, and dexterity to any character. From Hack and Slash Brewing Company, Muncie, Indiana. Imported and distributed by Klein's Bottling Company, Anson, Missouri. So I'll tell you what, why don't you have it? It's got a good potion. It's a little on the big side. But if you get in one of my games, it'll give you a +5 to both your strength and your dexterity, or whatever statistic approximates those in the game. Nice little treat. It'll last for only one round, but it might be able to get you out of a pinch. So that's my treasure for tonight. I thank you for your patience waiting for me to return. As you can hear, I'm probably still not at 100%, but close enough that I needed to make this video for you. So, on the subject of diseases, we will close the book for the time being. I am OmnusI, very grateful for you here tonight. Please, if you enjoyed this, like, subscribe, share with your friends. And maybe, just maybe, the Reaper will pass you by when it's time for the Pale Rider of Disease to come by. And it will not find you. I certainly hope so, because I wouldn't wish any of what I just had on anyone. So, again.